Hello. The purpose of this live stream is to gather our gang together and to publicize home economics and to publicize the fact that there was a revolution in this country, in the United States, that culminated in the 1970s, where they threw out home economics and replaced it with individual rights. And that's where the profound change in our society happened. And that's when it started on a peasant and property class society, the consumption society. And now we've sort of hit bottom, and now everybody's complaining, everybody's in dire straits. And so we're hoping to gather our gang together. That's the gal who's working, and she has children who's looking up to her for stability and food and clothing. And she doesn't make nearly enough money to support a child, no less herself. Uh, uh, and so we want you to start calling in, and we're going to start putting numbers on these things. If you live in Los Angeles or St. Louis or London, how much money do you make, and how much money does it cost for food and groceries and a place to live? And how much money do you have to spend to try and put your child into a daycare center to watch somebody else raise your child? It just goes on and on that way. It doesn't work, and it's not going to work out. Individual rights turns straight into the rights of the individuals in charge, and that's just another word for tyranny. And I got that a quote. That's a quote out of a Catholic seminary textbook from the 1950s. If you're a guy, you ask how many hours you have to work to put your child into a daycare center. How many hours does it have to work to come up with a house and a car in the garage, and food and clothing, insurance and medical insurance, and recreational time for yourself? Don't ask so much how much money do you make, but rather ask how many hours do you have to work? And we'll start putting two and two together here. You can see the revolution in the 1970s when they flip-flopped. There was home economics, and in the United States, it was the top of the class uh, economic setup in our country and probably history of the world. You could have a job as a repairman, and you could afford a three-bedroom brick house and a half-acre lot, and you could afford to support a wife and children. And that's a very much an arranged thing. It's an unnatural thing. You have to go out of your way and put effort into the system. And if you get to a certain point, you have a choice to either get onto a maintenance level, and then you say it's a God and country thing. You arrange everything to get to heaven after you die. And so you maximize benefits and maximize profits by putting somebody else in their own business. In other words, you have a choice to get onto a maintenance level, or you can cash in on it all. You can turn it into a peasant and property class society with you living in the foothills doing all the consuming, and everybody else living in the valley doing all the producing. You call the peon. And that's what they did. They simply chose to sell out. Those are the people who are in charge of our government today, not Donald Trump, but Joe Biden and the feminist movement. They're the ones who are in charge of the departments at the university. They're the leaders of the feminist movement. Harry the hippie, and Al the Afro, and Donna the feminist. And so the idea is to go back to that. They had a revolution in the 70s. One of us committed treason, and it isn't this side if you live in the United States. So who am I? I'm an American Yank. I'm a melting pot of citizenry. I fight for a race relegated to an endearing quality of your parents. I straighten up myself emotionally that way. Uh, these thoughts in my mind that have to do with sex have to do with getting the gal pregnant, and fear has to do with fear. Then I will the good of another person, which is not a natural thing. It's not the chimpanzee side of us, and it's not the hustling side of us. And they go together like two segments of a line, and that Christ, holding Christ's divinity as faith, is a dot on the lowercase letter I. And you hold Christ as just begging the question. You decide that you hold Christ's divinity as faith, and then you head down again. You become a well-adjusted person. In society, you'll have a judicial court, a court that will establish facts that are true as true. Christ is truth itself, and so you have a judicial court. And there's a little thing up there, isn't there? Whether you turn in one direction and turn in the other. It's called faith. And then you have the grand deduction, and society is made up of our citizenry, and then society is made up of the summation of home economics. Home economics is the literal opposite of poverty. It's what gets you out of poverty and into plenty. And you have to be a citizenry for that. You have to have a group of normal, well-adjusted people. And take a look. That's the stereotypical 1950s professional mom. And that's who we need. That's what we're trying to get to here. That's who this live stream is for. And the stereotypical guy, if you're an average Joe and you have a kid is looking up to you, and you're not the biological father, but he's starting to call you dad, and you don't know what to do. Well, you better start chiming in here and tell us how many hours you have to work. How much does it cost for a house? What's the mortgage on a house where you live? You don't rent property to other people. You don't rent property from other people. We're a bunch of Yanks around here, and we put ourselves into our own houses and our own businesses. It's a fancy name called subsidiary. Take your hand and push away. So if you have a franchise, well, you're a hotshot. We'll put you at the top of society if you can start a franchise, but you put everybody into an owner-operator. In other words, you arrange the parameters of a competition so that there's a lot of people owning things. And it just works out that way. So we've had a handful of these live streams trying to get people to start to chime in and trying to gather our gang. We also have a group on Facebook and Instagram, and we're trying to expand that. We have about 36 anecdotes on a YouTube channel, The Priest and the Pimp. And there's another YouTube channel called The Priest and the Pimp Media Access.com, or excuse me, Media Access. But we're trying to consolidate them. And then we're going to expand. And the idea is to get you together. And once you do that, then we can do something about it. We know exactly what's wrong, exactly what to do about it, and exactly how to do it. Doing it is another thing. We can tell you how, but you're going to have to be the ones to do that. We'll have a dependent personality. We'll find the sheriff, our sheriff of Dodge City, and we'll put him up at the top of the class, and we go back to work. Let's go back and talk about home economics. Home economics is when the marriage couple is viewed as an economic building block. And so you go up to the computer, you're listening to this on, you pretend to take out a transistor. You take out a second transistor, and as you take out the third transistor, it's no longer a computer, it's a pile of electronic parts. You put that transistor back in, it's back to being a computer, and there you go. Mommies can't take care of their 10-year-olds and go to work at the factory. Dads can't go to work at the factory and take care of mom and the kids and support the mom and the kids. And it clicks in. It becomes a smallest economic thing. And all you have to do is ask the mom how many oranges she wants to use, how many orange trees to plant. I have to be careful because we're going to use a detached 1950s house to get our grips, to get a mental attitude about it. And you have to remember that houses today aren't built that way. They weren't built intentionally for the people who live in them. They weren't built as a business. So we have a living room that's, we'll check with the professor of home economics. It's maybe 20 by 12 feet or something, very comfortable. And a bedroom that might be 10 by 12 feet that can house 2 children of the same gender, that sort of thing. And a backyard that's comfortable enough for the kids to play in and for you to play in. Remember, all this society is based around that person and that couple. And it all goes through their mind. So everything centers around mom and dad, or the single guy and the single gal. And since there are kids involved, we're talking about mom and dad at the moment. And so there's a detached house. They're single, they live in a condo, and they can own a condo, but they can't own a house, and they can't buy houses and rent out, that sort of thing. I drifted for a minute, so let's go back to our detached family house from the 1950s. And there's a couple in there, and they're deciding between buying a couch or maybe a couple of recliner chairs. And so you daydream a bit. You go off to the side, and you start with farming and mining. Then above that, manufacturing. Then above that, wholesale, retail, and repair. And above that, retirement, education, and recreation. And doctors and lawyers become a kind of ladder that holds it all together. And there's a Catholic priest that causes it all to come into being to begin with. This is all a God and country thing. This comes out of monks and monasteries and popes and that sort of thing. And there you go. As long as certain rules apply, the same people who do the producing, do the consuming, you have to be a normal, well-adjusted person, as close as human beings can get. And then you can just daydream. Let's say they choose a couch instead of some recliner chairs, and you can daydream and you can see all of the farms and the way the mines are mined, and then the manufacturing, and then the stores, how the stores are set up and the advertising. It's all geared to give that couple what they want. And the kicker is that couple is us. They're the ones, it's hubby that works at the furniture factory. It's the gal who's a professional mom. Motherhood was regarded as a profession. A housewife was a profession. And you had to have a house if you have a housewife. And you put a lot of effort into this. This is our culture and our society. And they threw that out. We'll go back to that in a big hurry. God and country is made up of three things in our shop manual fashion. One is straightening out our emotions. Our emotions don't head in the right direction. We do have a chimpanzee side of us, and we also have two other natures in our shop. We have the nature of people who deliberately hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate people. And then we have this other nature. And this other nature requires that infusion, Christ. I choose to straighten up my emotions. I choose to will the good of another person. And I do it because Christ rose on the third day. And there's a little infusion, they say, that's what they call it. And so there's that second nature. And it's that second nature that we're talking about, God and country. If you're in that one, you start looking at the comments here. You start commenting on it. You've got to start speaking up. If you do, then we can do something about it. You get up, you recognize, right about here, get a bit nervous. So let me stop. Did courts come out in the 1970s and say that in the United States, and say that there would be no religion in government? Yes, they did. They came out and said there'll be absolutely no religion in government. And the bum's rush was they actually did adopt a religion. They adopted the stereotypical definition of a satanic church. Remember, those three things that make up Christ, those three things that make up a Yank. A Yank is in a very real way a Catholic in the pews. And so they threw out being a Yank. The complete absence of being a Yank is called evil. It's a classical definition of what evil is. And evil is hustling, diabolical, splitting things apart, tearing things apart, getting to the point where everything collapses, holding absolutes, taking things to absolute extreme, hustling to its absolute extreme. And take a look around you. They threw out God. They had the sexual revolution. They separated sex from the act of actually getting the gal pregnant. And they threw out decency as a formal argument. They threw out the idea of making money by making somebody else better off. And they started making money by forcing other people to have to work more hours. In the Bible, that's called the unforgivable sin. But at the time, they'll just laugh and say they're not religious. And they came across as sophisticated intellectuals. If you were a housewife or you were a guy trying to support a wife and kids, you were literally a white male chauvinist pig. And now that things have hit bottom, it looks completely different. You start to wake up and see it. That's true on a personal level. They say you have to hit bottom before you sort of change. And that's true at the level of society as well. and we better do something about it. So what do we do? In a very real way, Donald Trump is an absolute hero. He has a chance to be a George Washington to the entire world, and I hope he does. But there's still that fundamental mistake being made, and if you don't watch it, nothing's going to change it. Just like Ronald Reagan tried to in the 1980s. He was a bigwig Democrat. He was a union leader. He switched over to the Republican Party, and Republican or Democrat really didn't mean anything. He was trying to stand up to a bum's rush. And in the end, it didn't work, even though he was very good at it. Well, Donald Trump doesn't have to be a genius in everything. He broke one of the fundamental rules. He stood up to a bum's rush by himself. You're not supposed to be able to do that. You have to have a third person defend you. That's all there is to it. And how he did that is, well, unbelievable. That said, so what do you do about all this? We're opening our mouths. What do we suggest? What's wrong? They threw out God and country. They threw out those things that make up God and country. What do you do about it, and how do you do it? Well, you, among other things, you go to the Supreme Court, and instead of the court saying there is no God, you replace them with the Apostles' Creed. There's only God and country. I feel horrible. I feel like I'm trying to make the grade or something, and I am in a real way. I have to be normal, and someone has to teach me that. In psychology, I'm going to have this desire to turn around and attack everybody, and all I'm doing is saying I'm going to try and be a normal, well-adjusted person, right out of Aristotle and Socrates and all those famous guys, and Christ. And so there you go. That's the first step. Then you go through government. The first step would be then a course, a 16-week, week 1, day 1, hour 1 course that teaches us a sense of original sin, then how to stand up to a bum's rush. And then you would go to the Supreme Court and then replace them with only God and country. I'm feeling sorry for myself, so let me understand that one of us committed treason. They did in the 1970s, not us. And quite frankly, in the 1950s, they said they would. They said they would overthrow the Communist Party, said they would overthrow the United States right around 1973. That's exactly what happened. Let's continue. To use Tucson, where this is being filmed from, you would go to the courts, and then I'm sure without any violence, they would say, I'm sorry. The judges would get up. They would get off that bench, they would get a garbage sack, and they would start forming a class of peasantry beneath the class of poverty that they caused. I doubt that, but I'm sure they will, right? And then instead of getting yourself a Cuban cigar and one of those hats and making yourself a junior grade god, putting yourself in charge and doing it all over again, we'll pull a fast one. We'll go find those poor slobs of a criminal trial attorney that defend the poor and the oppressed, and the prosecutor that defend the poor and the oppressed. That's not the way it is now. And we'll insist they're in charge. Where will we get the resources? Well, there's plenty of stockbroking attorneys and feminist attorneys and real estate attorneys and guys who get in the apartments and rent them out to other people, and guys who control housing projects. And we'll take away, I'm sure there's plenty of wealth there for us to give to the criminal trial attorney. In other words, we have a dependent personality that way. We'll find the Forest Slob that defends the poor and the oppressed, and I insist that he takes Wednesdays off, and I insist that he drives a Corvette, and I insist that he plays in that silly tennis tournament they have every year. In fact, I insist at it at the point of a gun. It goes against the psychology of a human being. It goes against Mother Nature. It goes against everything. It's actually a terribly violent position. And that's phase 1, to go downtown and to recognize we did have a revolution and to straighten things out that way. And we do it by finding the poor Slav that defends the poor and the oppressed, and we stand up for him. We put him back in charge. Here in Tucson, you would go down there and you would first get the bishop that's down there and say, I'm sorry, and thank you, I'm sorry. And you decide to put him in charge, and then because of that, those judges get out of there and you replace them with people who defend the poor and the oppressed. And you would head over to the University of Arizona, and I'm sure those people would do away with the feminist studies and the Black studies and Mexican studies and the business college and the law college. I'm sure those professors will do the same thing. They'll go form a class of peasantry beneath the class of poverty that they caused. You're right. And then you would replace them with a college of home economics. And if you're a gal, if we're so desperate for a college of home economics, it's silly. That's what this is all about. And that would be phase one. You go through society and change society back. Phase two, to use this neighborhood that this house is sitting in, right just north of the University of Arizona. They're building a slum straight out of my school days. And it's those university professors that are doing it. And so they don't mind changing it back. This neighborhood was built in the 1950s. And you could just see this, how it was working so well. This house is a house I grew up in. Our dad was a repairman, and he could afford a 3-bedroom brick house. 2 doors down was a milkman. Next door was a plumber. You get the idea. Up the road was a guy who worked in a feed store. And the same people who did the producing did the consuming. This neighborhood was built by Dee Consini's dad. Dee Consini was a hotshot senator. And you could see where one guy built one house and another guy might have built 2 houses. And you could see the idea of subsidiary, taking your hand and pushing it away. They got very good at it, and probably as best as human beings on this earth could get at it. And life was easy. That's how they would describe life in that era. It all changed. And so the idea in phase two would be to go north here. They're building a slum. They would buy the house. First, they would buy the house, and their children would live in it so they could go to the university. That was very big around here. And when they graduated, they would sell the house. And the act of buying the houses caused the houses to go up in price. And they could sell them, and they'd pay for their college, for the kids to go into college. And they would cause inflation. Then Darwin sets in. They bought a house, and they would start renting it out. And then Darwin sets it again. They would build a house in the backyard, and they would build these apartments with 7 or 8 bedrooms, and they would call them houses, put that in quotes. And you could just see a slum being built. It's exactly how they would say slums are built decades ago. They did it, and they're doing it, and nobody can stand up to them. And in the end, nobody can stand up to them because you can't shove your religion down their throat. Do you guys listening to that? We're in the United States. It should have been a given, but it wasn't. It isn't. So phase two, you go between Tucson and Tombstone, pick up the ladder that's upside down, turn it right side up. Those people who, there was a soldered connection between money and malice. And so those people who are buying property and renting it out, I'm sure they'll give up their property, and they'll go to those judges and university professors, join them and start picking up they'll form a class of poverty beneath a class of homeless that are right down the street here. And you turn around and sell them, but you don't sell them to plumbers. You sell them to American Yanks who have a job as a plumber, and you sell them to our housewife, the gal who will try and be normal and well-adjusted, the gal who has a sense of empathy and sympathy, the gal who's courageous, brave, and strong, kind, compassionate, and just. And she gets the house. She gets the pleasures of sex. If she's going to change the dirty diapers, she gets the sex, and she gets the movies made about her and the songs sung about her. And she gets to be the one to play in that tennis tournament, amateur tennis and professional citizenry. You get the idea. That's phase two. You set the ladder straight. In phase three, you picture a detached American house. You go out to the side and go through the drill: farming and mining, manufacturing, wholesale, retail and repair, retirement, education, and recreation. And you get started. You start to build, man, build. You Darwinize until you get to on a maintenance level, till there's a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. It's a famous saying. Well, you get the idea. We have some groups here. We're trying to go live on a live stream to gather our group together. So if you're listening to this, try and chime in and tell your friends. We need that gal to start chiming in. Donald Trump is an absolute hero, but who cares about him? We need Melania Trump. We need his wife. We're so desperate for a icon, a Princess Diane or Jacqueline Kennedy, someone to represent the gal who's working a couple of jobs and trying to support a couple of children, and the guy the same. If we can get those gals back, then we have somebody to fight for. The Catholic nun, you put the Catholic nun in charge and these gals appear. And so if you're listening to this, I hope someone is, you start joining our gang. We know exactly what to do. We know exactly how to do it. And we know exactly what to do about it. And we know exactly how to do it. Getting it done is something we're going to ask you about. Well, thank you. We'll see you hopefully next Saturday at 11 o'clock Los Angeles time and 7 o'clock London time. And then next Sunday at 8 o'clock Los Angeles time and 4 o'clock London time. I hope I'm going to have a problem. I had plans on having a live stream as often as I could, but the truth of the matter is I do a lot of babysitting, and I don't mind babysitting a bit, but I do a lot of babysitting because no one can afford to put their child in a daycare center. And things are dire straits that way, as they are. It's not going to work out. They'll keep it up until it collapses. And to sneak something in, you have to go behind Donald Trump's back and straighten things out here. And then guys like Donald Trump can go to work. And so we'll do just that. So we hope to see you at least next week.